prologue, the fog before dawn. The fog rolled in from the Mississippi like a living thing. It swallowed sound, first the creak of wood, the murmur of men, even the distant splash of oars, until silence pressed down like a heavy hand. Then it took sight. Lanterns faded into dull orange ghosts. Faces became shadows. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. Somewhere in that white void, thousands of soldiers waited to kill or be killed. General Andrew Jackson stood motionless behind the American line, boots sunk into the mud of Chalmette Plantation. His coat was thin for the cold, but he did not seem to notice. His eyes were fixed ahead, though there was nothing to see. Only fog, only waiting, and somewhere beyond the most powerful army in the world. Chapter 1. A city worth taking. New Orleans was never meant to be ordinary. New Orleans sat like a jewel at the mouth of the Mississippi River, a gateway to a continent. Whoever controlled it controlled trade, power, and the future of a young nation still trying to prove it deserved to exist. In 1814, that future hung by a thread. The United States was barely holding together. The War of 1812 had dragged on longer than anyone expected. Washington, D.C. had already burned. Morale was fragile. Resources were thin. And then came the news. The British were coming. Not a raid, not a small force. An invasion. Ships packed with hardened veterans, men who had fought and defeated Napoleon himself, were sailing toward Louisiana. Their goal was simple: take New Orleans, cut America in half, end the war. A general no one trusted, Andrew Jackson, was not the obvious choice to stop them. He was thin, sickly looking, often in pain from old wounds. He coughed frequently. He argued with politicians. He had a temper that could ignite faster than gunpowder. But beneath all that, he was relentless. Jackson had spent years fighting on the frontier. He understood chaos. He understood improvisation. And most importantly, he understood one thing many polished generals did not. War was not always won by perfection. Sometimes it was won by stubbornness. And Jackson had more of that than anyone alive. An army like no other. The force gathering under Jackson's command was unusual. This was not a polished European army. It was a patchwork. Frontiersmen and buckskin local militia with little training. Free black soldiers defending their home, Choctaw warriors who knew the land better than anyone. Pirates, yes, actual pirates led by Jean Lafitte. Many of them had never fought together. Some of them didn't even trust each other. But they all understood one thing: if New Orleans fell, everything changed. The British advanced. While Jackson scrambled to build defenses, the British moved with precision. Their fleet slipped through the Gulf of Mexico. Their troops landed south of the city. Their officers, confident, disciplined, experienced, believed victory was inevitable. Why wouldn't they? They had more soldiers, better training, superior equipment, a reputation that terrified enemies. To them, this battle was already decided. All that remained was execution. The race against time, Jackson knew he could not win a traditional battle, so he didn't try. Instead, he chose ground carefully, Chalmette, just outside the city. There, he ordered the construction of a defensive line, a long earthen wall reinforced with timber and cotton bales. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't elegant, but it was strong. And behind it, Jackson placed his mismatched army and waited. The night before and the night of January 7, 1815, the air was thick with tension. Men cleaned muskets with shaking hands, others wrote letters they might never send. Some prayed, some tried to sleep, few succeeded. Jackson walked the line alone, no grand speech, no dramatic gestures, just quiet presence. When soldiers saw him, something shifted. They straightened, they steadied, because if that stubborn, half-sick general believed they could win, maybe they could. The Last Stand at New Orleans, Chapter 2, The Fog of War. The fog did not lift, it thickened. By dawn, the world had shrunk to a pale gray tunnel where distance meant nothing, and danger could be standing 10 steps away or 1,000. Behind the American line, men shifted nervously. A musket misfired somewhere down the trench. Someone cursed, someone else whispered a prayer. And then, a sound. Low at first, dull, like distant thunder rolling across water. Cannons. The first signal, General Andrew Jackson didn't move at the first boom. He listened, measured, counted. The British weren't just firing, they were positioning. Testing range. Marking distance through fog they could barely see through themselves. Steady? Jackson muttered more to the moment than any man. His officers stood close, waiting for orders that did not come. Not yet. Across the field on the other side of the mist, the British army advanced, disciplined, silent, relentless. Rows of red-coated soldiers stepped forward in formation, boots sinking into wet ground. Their officers rode behind them, swords drawn, not for fighting yet, but for control. Among them was General Edward Pakenham, a man who had fought in Europe and expected this battle to be no different. To him, this was simple: advance, break the line, take the city. The Americans in his mind were not equals. They were an obstacle. The waiting line back behind the earthworks at Chalmette, the American line remained eerily still. Men gripped rifles, fingers stiff from cold. Some squinted into the fog, trying to see shapes that weren't there. Others listened. That was the worst part, listening. Because slowly, unmistakably, the sound changed. The thunder became rhythm. Boots, hundreds, then thousands, marching, closer. A different kind of army. This wasn't an army that moved as one. It breathed differently. Along the line, a Tennessee rifleman adjusted his aim with calm precision. A Louisiana militia soldier wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold. A free black artillery crew checked and rechecked their cannon. Choctaw warriors crouched low, eyes fixed forward, and somewhere behind them, pirates loaded guns with practiced efficiency. They didn't look like a single force. They looked like chaos. But they were united by one thing. They were not retreating. The moment before, a figure appeared in the fog, then another, then dozens. Faint shapes, ghost-like, moving forward in straight lines. The British had arrived. An officer shouted, "Hold your fire!" The command echoed down the line. Some men tightened their grip so hard their knuckles turned white. Others whispered, "Wait, wait, wait!" The first shot, no one ever agreed who fired first. Some said it was a nervous militia soldier. Others claimed it was a British skirmisher. But in a single instant, the silence shattered. A crack, then another. Then everything exploded. Thunder unleashed, American cannons roared to life. Flames burst from their mouths, tearing through fog like lightning. Grapeshot ripped into advancing British ranks before many even saw where it came from. The effect was immediate. Devastating. Lines faltered but did not break. Because this was not an ordinary army. These were veterans of European wars. They had seen worse, or so they believed. A wall of fire. Jackson finally gave the order. Now let them have it. Rifles fired in waves, not chaos, not panic. Precision. Frontiersmen, many of whom had grown up hunting, did not waste bullets. They aimed carefully, deliberately. And when they fired, they hit. British officers fell first, then standard bearers. Then entire sections of advancing lines collapsed under the relentless accuracy. Pakenham's realization through the smoke and fog. General Pakenham saw something he had not expected. Not fear, not retreat, but resistance, organized, deadly resistance. His plan depended on speed, momentum, shock. Instead, his army was slowing, bleeding, stalling. And the enemy? They weren't breaking. They were holding. The fog turns red, visibility remained poor, but now it didn't matter. The battlefield had found its rhythm. Fire, reload, fire again. Cannon blasts shook the ground. Men shouted orders no one could hear. Smoke mixed with fog until the entire field became a choking gray haze filled with flashes of light and screams. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched. Seconds vanished. Jackson holds the line. Jackson rode along the back of the defense, ignoring danger completely. Bullets tore through the air around him. He didn't flinch. "Hold!" he shouted. "Hold your ground!" And they did. Every part of that strange, mismatched army held. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but stubbornly, relentlessly. Something begins to break out in the fog. Something subtle began to shift. The British advance, once steady and confident, started to fracture. Units lost alignment. Officers struggled to relay orders. Men hesitated not from fear, but from confusion. They could not see clearly. They could not coordinate. And worst of all, they could not silence the American guns. The turning point approaches. What was meant to be a swift, decisive assault was turning into something else. Something slower. Something bloodier. Something no one on the British side had planned for. And behind the American line, Jackson knew. Not yet victory, but something close. Very close. The Last Stand at New Orleans. Chapter 3. The breaking line. By now, the fog had thinned, but not enough to reveal the full truth. Only fragments of it. Flashes of redcoats, falling bodies, muzzle blast tearing holes through gray air, and beneath it all, the sound. A constant deafening roar of cannon and rifle fire that no longer came in bursts, but as a continuous wall of thunder. A plan unravelings. General Edward Pakenham had expected resistance. He had not expected this. His strategy had been precise. Advance in coordinated columns, breach the American line, overwhelmed by discipline and force. But something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. Units were delayed. Key equipment ladders and fascines needed to cross the American defenses had not arrived on time. Orders were lost in the smoke, signals misunderstood, and the ground itself, wet, muddy, unforgiving, slowed everything. The cost of delay, every second mattered, and every second the British hesitated. The Americans fired. From behind their fortified line, Jackson's men had the advantage they needed: cover visibility from a fixed position, time to reload and aim. This was not chaos anymore, it was execution. The open field. The British soldiers had nowhere to hide, no trenches, no walls, no protection. Only open ground stretching toward a line of fire that never seemed to stop. They marched anyway, because that's what they were trained to do. Forward, always forward. The weight of command somewhere in the chaos. Andrew Jackson watched it unfold. He had gambled everything on this position. If the British broke through, New Orleans would fall. The war could end in disaster. But if they held, everything would change. The charge Pakenham made his decision. If the plan had failed, force would succeed. He ordered a full advance, not cautious, not measured, aggressive, decisive. British officers raised their swords forward, and the red line surged, a field of fire. What happened next would be remembered for generations. As the British advanced, American artillery unleashed everything they had. Grape shot tore through tightly packed formations. Men fell in clusters, lines bent, but still pushed forward. Then came the rifles. Not wild firing, not panic, but controlled, deadly precision. Each shot chosen, each target deliberate. Officers fell first, then the men carrying ladders, then entire sections collapsed into confusion. The collapse begins without officers' commands faded, without ladders. The wall could not be breached. Without coordination, momentum died, and without momentum, the charge failed. Pakenham falls in the middle of it all. General Pakenham rode forward trying to rally his troops. He waved them on, shouted orders through the chaos, tried to restore control. Then it happened. A blast of grape shot struck him. He fell from his horse, wounded, carried from the field as the battle raged on without him. The moment spread like shock through the ranks. Their leader was down. A silent realizations. Something changed then. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. The British advance slowed, then faltered, then stopped. The Americans hold behind the line. Jackson's army, this strange coalition of militia, soldiers, pirates, and warriors, remained standing, bruised, exhausted, but unbroken. They had done what no one expected. They had stopped the British Empire. The final attempts. Even after Pakenham fell, some British units tried to continue. Small groups pushed forward, others fired blindly into smoke. But it was over. They just didn't know it yet. The field after fire. As the shooting slowed, the battlefield revealed itself. The fog lifted just enough, and what it showed was devastating. The open field was covered with fallen soldiers. Red coats scattered across mud and grass. The cost of the assault lay silent in front of the American line. Jackson's stillness. Jackson's stillness. Jackson did not celebrate. He did not cheer. He simply stood and looked, because he understood something deeper than victory. This wasn't just a battle won, it was a turning point. Chapter 4. The unlikely hero's victory didn't belong to one man. It belonged to many, some of whom history almost forgot. Jean Lafitte and the pirates among the defenders were the men of Jean Lafitte, smugglers, outlaws, men who had once stood outside the law. But on this day, they became defenders of a nation. Their artillery crews were among the most effective on the field. Precise, disciplined, deadly. They knew cannons better than most soldiers, and it showed. The Free Black Soldiers, another force, stood firm under fire. Free Black Soldiers of Louisiana. They fought not just for a city, but for recognition, for dignity, for a place in a country that had not fully accepted them. And on that battlefield, they proved their worth beyond question. Holding positions under intense fire, they showed discipline equal to any trained army. The frontiersmen. Then there were the riflemen from Tennessee and Kentucky, hunters, marksmen, men who didn't waste shots. Their accuracy changed the battle, where European warfare often relied on mass fire. These men aimed, and when they fired, leaders fell. Choctaw warriors fighting alongside them were Choctaw warriors. They moved differently, fought differently, used the terrain in ways others couldn't. They had been underestimated, but not by Jackson, and certainly not after this battle. A different kind of victory. This victory wasn't clean, it wasn't orderly. It didn't look like the polished victories of European armies. It was raw, improvised, unlikely. And that's exactly why it worked. A message to the world. The result sent a powerful message. The United States, young, divided, imperfect, could defend itself against the strongest army in the world. Chapter 5. The Aftermath of Thunder. The guns fell silent, but the silence was heavier than the battle. Smoke still drifted across the field. The ground, once hidden by fog, now revealed everything. Bodies lay scattered across the mud, most of them wearing red. The scale of what had just happened began to settle in. The Battle of New Orleans was over, and it had not gone the way anyone expected. A victory hard to believe. American soldiers slowly rose from behind their defenses. Some stared ahead in disbelief. Others didn't move at all. Because even victory can feel unreal when it comes too suddenly, and at such a cost. They had expected to fight for hours, maybe days. Instead, the decisive moment had come and gone in less than a morning. The British withdrawal across the field, British forces began to retreat. Not in panic, not in chaos, but in silence. Their confidence had been shattered, not just by defeat, but by how quickly it had happened. What was meant to be a decisive victory had become a devastating loss. Counting the cost. The numbers told a story few could ignore. The British had suffered thousands of casualties. The American losses were remarkably low. It wasn't just a victory, it was a shock to the world. A smaller, less experienced force had defeated one of the most powerful armies on Earth, and done so decisively. Jackson's moment, General Andrew Jackson finally allowed himself to breathe. But even then, he didn't celebrate like others expected. He walked the field, looked at the fallen, both sides. Because he understood something many did not, victory always comes with a price. Chapter 6. A war already ended here, lies one of history's strangest twists. While the battle raged in Louisiana, peace had already been agreed upon. Weeks earlier, diplomats in Europe had signed the Treaty of Ghent. The war was technically over, but no one on the battlefield knew. The delay that changed everything. In an age without instant communication, news traveled slowly. Ships carried messages across oceans. Weeks passed before information arrived, and in that gap, history unfolded. An unnecessary battle, or not. Some would later call the battle unnecessary, a fight that didn't need to happen. But that view missed something important, because even if the war had officially ended, the meaning of the victory did not. A nation reborn, the United States had struggled throughout the War of 1812. Losses, burned cities, doubt. But this battle changed the narrative. It gave the country something it desperately needed: confidence. Chapter 7. The rise of a legend. In the weeks that followed, news of the victory spread, slowly at first, then rapidly. And with it, one name rose above all others: Andrew Jackson. From general to national hero, Jackson became more than a military leader. He became a symbol of resistance, of strength, of possibility. The same man many had doubted was now celebrated across the nation. A reputation forged in battle stories spread quickly. Some exaggerated, some mythologized, but all pointed to one truth: Jackson had held the line against impossible odds. The road ahead. Years later, that same man would become the 7th President of the United States. But his legacy began here, on a muddy field outside New Orleans. Chapter 8. Legacy of the impossible. Time passed, but the memory remained. The Battle of New Orleans became more than a battle. It became a story, a lesson, a symbol. More than just victory. This wasn't just about defeating an army. It was about proving something larger, that a young nation, still finding its identity, could stand against the world's greatest power. An army like no other. The victory belonged to everyone who stood that day: soldiers, militia, free black fighters, native warriors, pirates. A coalition that should not have worked, but did. History's quiet truth. Not everything about this battle fits into legend. There were mistakes, luck, timing, and the strange coincidence of a war already ended. But that's what makes it real. The final reflection: in the end, the story of New Orleans is not just about war. It's about moments when everything hangs in balance, when the outcome seems certain, until it isn't. Epilogue. The echo that remains even today. If you stand near the fields where the battle was fought, you might not hear cannons, or marching boots, or shouted orders, but the echo remains in history, in memory, in the identity of a nation that refused to fall.